By the time the war ended in the spring of 1945, hundreds of millions of guns, artillery pieces, tanks and military aircraft had been produced and were in active circulation. There were several thousands of abandoned German tanks all around Europe. What happened to these Panzer after the war? How did the nations deal with this sudden surplus of armaments? Well, raw materials for industrial manufacturing were in very short supply for most of the nations right after the end of the war. So captured and surplus tanks provided an ideal source of metal. Consequently, the large majority of weapons were simply melted down and used in manufacturing. Another place where many military vehicles had been preserved, but in a different manner, is on the Eastern Front, where marshes provided ideal conditions for the preservation of those vehicles driven into them. Today, in Belarus, for example, tank hunters make good money by salvaging German World War II tanks from marshes and restoring them. Captured prototypes with advanced technology, so mainly Panther and King Tiger tanks, were studied by Allied scientists and engineers before being destroyed. Even before the war ended, the US and other Western nations conducted various anti-armor and mobility tests. In the end, most ended up being used as test vehicles or simple targets. Finally, many of the more impressive captured or surrendered Axis vehicles, like tanks, ended up in Allied museums or public exhibitions. Some were kept for museum purposes and later sold for private collectors. Although the German army was deactivated after World War II, not to appear until the 1950s, quite a few German panzers soldiered on in French, Czechoslovak, Spanish and Swiss service. Many of these vehicles were sold to Syria in the 1950s and were used in combat for the last time in the Golan Heights during the Six-Day War in 1967. For example, this is a Tatra OT 810, which was an upgraded Sonderkraftfahrzeug 251 built for the Czechoslovak army and was used from 1955 until 1962. This is a G13 Swiss Hetzer built by Skoda for Switzerland from 1947 till 1950. France supplied the Swiss with captured Panzerjäger Hetzer in September of 1945, which they then ordered from the Czech manufacturer. The G13 was used by the Swiss army until the 1960s. The Czech, Bulgarian, Syrian and Spanish armies also continued to use the Panzer IV in the 1950s and well beyond. The French army used over 50 captured Panther tanks from 1946 until 1950, although the Panthers provided unreliable in French service. So the French industry copied the Panther's 57mm gun and fitted it to the early models of the AMX-13 light tank, which was a major export success for France. The Israelis also fitted the French-made gun to their Sherman M50s. Many former German officers were employed by Syria to build its new army after the foundation of Israel. As a result, from 1949 until 1956, Syria bought many captured Panzer IV tanks, Sturmgeschütz III assault guns, Hummel self-propelled guns, and a few Jagdpanzer IVs from France, Spain and Czechoslovakia. They were used in the Golan Heights during the Six-Day War, like this Syrian Army Hummel self-propelled gun in Damascus in the 1960s. This Syrian Panzer IV was knocked out by Israeli tanks during the 1967 fightings. It's also possible that some came up against the Sherman M50s sporting French 75mm guns, which were copied of the Panther tank's long L70 gun. This Jagdpanzer IV took a direct hit from an Israeli tank with devastating consequences. Here is a Syrian Sturmgeschütz III with its crew before the Six-Day War, and the remains of the same Sturmgeschütz which can still be seen in the Golan Heights.